For 32 years, Sterling Financial wasn't just my employer. It was the bedrock of my life. My name is Frank Miller. At 58 years old, I was the firm's chief risk officer, a title that sounds important in a vague way, which suited me just fine in simple terms. I was the company's Cassandro, the man who saw disaster coming and quietly built the walls that would hold it back. I designed the stress test models that saved us during the 2008 crash. I created the currency hedging, strategies that protected our international funds from volatile markets. I was a man of spreadsheets, actuarial tables, and quiet, unshakable loyalty. The founder, old Mr. Abernathy, used to call me the company's conscience. We had a relationship built on decades of mutual respect. He understood that my relentless pessimism was the firm's greatest asset. I wasn't a gunslinger. I was the man who made sure the gunslingers didn't shoot the company in the foot. But Mr. Abernathy retired, and the world changed. The board, eager for a taste of the aggressive growth they saw in tech, brought in a new CEO, Julian Croft. Croft was 35. With a predatory smile, a wardrobe of tailored suits that cost more than my first car, and a vocabulary peppered with words like disrupt, synergize, and optimize. He saw Sterling Financial not as a legacy to be preserved, but as a rusty engine to be stripped for parts. He looked at me with my graying temples and my cautious philosophies, and saw a dinosaur dot the atmosphere in the office soured almost overnight. The comfortable hum of steady work was replaced by the tense buzz of anxiety. Long-serving employees were optimized out of their jobs, replaced by hungry young MBAs who worshipped at the altar of Croft. He called me into his glass-walled office one day, gesturing dismissively at the complex risk models on my screen. "Frank, this is all very thorough," he'd said, the compliment landing like an insult. "But we're a shark now, not a whale. We need to be faster, more agile. We can't be anchored by ancient history." The heart attack didn't announce itself with dramatic chest-clutching flair. It was a silent, creeping pressure that started in my shoulder while I was reviewing third-quarter liquidity reports. A cold sweat, a shortness of breath. The last thing I remember is the numbers on the spreadsheet blurring together before the world went dark. I woke up in a hospital, tubes in my nose and a rhythmic beep keeping time with my fragile heartbeat. The doctors called it a significant cardiac event brought on by stress. They told me I was lucky. My luck ran out a week later. While I was taking my first tentative steps down the sterile hospital corridor, my phone rang. It was Cynthia Croft's new head of HR, a woman with a voice as cold and sharp as broken glass. "Frank, I hope you're feeling better." She began with no sincerity whatsoever. "Listen, Julian has been forced to make some tough decisions. We're undergoing a significant restructuring to streamline operations. As part of that, the role of Chief Risk Officer is being absorbed into the broader strategy team. Your position has been made redundant." I stopped, leaning against the wall, the phone feeling slick in my sweaty palm. "Redundant. I've been with the firm for 32 years, and we appreciate your service," she said, her tone a perfect imitation of human empathy. "We've put together a severance package. It's modest, but in exchange for your signature on a full release of all claims and a non-disparagement agreement, it should help you transition into an early retirement." The world swam before my eyes. They weren't just firing me. They were firing me while I was in the hospital recovering from a work-induced heart attack. They were using my moment of greatest vulnerability to cast me aside like a broken piece of office equipment. The modest package would barely cover my medical bills. They were leaving me to die, financially and professionally. I ended the call, my mind a maelstrom of shock and a deep, profound sense of betrayal. My life's work, my loyalty, my dedication, it all meant nothing. To Julian Croft, I was just a line item on a budget, an unacceptable liability. That night, lying in the dark, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound. I felt old, broken, and utterly defeated. My career was over. My health was shattered. My future was a terrifying blank. And then a memory flickered. It was distant, buried under decades of work, a relic from a different era of the company. It was from a time in the late 90s, after a particularly brutal market downturn. Mr. Abernathy had tasked me with creating safeguards, not just for the company's capital, but for its people. I had spent a month designing a series of arcane, deeply embedded financial protocols. Most were discarded but one. One I had pushed through. It was an experimental financial instrument, a sort of self-executing golden parachute for the entire corporate body designed to trigger under a very specific set of circumstances. It was buried in the firm's foundational documents, a dusty tome nobody had looked at in 20 years, called the Legacy Systems Accord. I had called it the Actuary's Clause. Its official designation was Clause 217G. It was designed to be the company's ultimate immune response, a way to purge reckless leadership by creating a sudden, massive liability if the company's long-term stability was ever sacrificed for short-term risk. And it was keyed to a single, unlikely trigger: my own involuntary termination. Croft thought he was cutting loose an old man. He had no idea he was about to arm a bomb I had planted 25 years ago. Discharged from the hospital and confined to my quiet suburban home, I began my campaign. My official access to Sterling's systems was gone. But 32 years of building a fortress leaves you with a detailed knowledge of all its secret passages. I couldn't log in directly, but I knew which public filings contained the data I needed. I knew how to read between the lines of a quarterly report, how to interpret the subtle shifts in language in a shareholder circular. My apartment's spare bedroom, once a dusty storage space, became my command center. I set up my old multi-monitor system, the screens filled not with risk models, but with a new project: the systematic deconstruction of Julian Croft's empire. The first step was to find an ally. I needed real-time internal data. I thought of Maria Flores, a sharp young accountant I had mentored a few years back. She was diligent, smart, and had a strong moral compass. I had seen the same distaste in her eyes for Croft's new regime that I had felt. I invited her for lunch at a quiet diner, far from the city's financial district. She was horrified when I told her what had happened. "They did that while you were in the hospital. Frank, that's monstrous. It's business, Maria, the kind Julian Croft practices," I said, my voice even. "But he's made a mistake. Thinks the old rules don't apply anymore. I need you to help me remind him that they do." She was scared. "Frank, they monitor everything. Keyloggers, network sniffers. If I access the wrong files, I'm fired or worse." "I don't want you to access the wrong files," I explained. "I want you to access the right ones." Standard liquidity reports, debt-to-equity ratio analyses, the kind of documents your department generates every week. Just send them to my secure email from a public library. No commentary, no names, just the data. Her loyalty to me won out over her fear of Croft. "For you, Frank." "Okay, I'm in." The documents started arriving the next day. As the first pieced them together, the scope of Croft's recklessness became terrifyingly clear. He wasn't just trimming fat. He was cutting into bone and marrow. He had leveraged the company's stable assets to the absolute legal limit to finance a massive, higher-risk acquisition of a volatile tech startup in the biotech space. It was a flashy, headline-grabbing move designed to rocket the stock price into the stratosphere. It was also a bet-the-company gamble. He was steering the ship directly into a hurricane, having thrown the man who built the storm shelters overboard. This was the opening I needed. Clause 217G was not a simple payout. It was a complex derivative instrument tied to two specific conditions being met simultaneously. My involuntary termination, condition 1, met, and a market volatility event that exceeded the firm's 19-day liquidity reserves, condition 2, pending. The clause was designed to be dormant during normal operations. But if the company was ever leveraged so dangerously that a predictable market swing could threaten its solvency, it would activate. The payout wasn't just a number, it was a formula. It was calculated as a percentage of the total potential loss the company faced due to imprudent risk exposure, effectively making the man sounding the alarm. A primary creditor. Croft's huge gamble had stretched the company's liquidity thin. He had pushed Sterling Financial right to the edge of the clause's trigger point. He had done most of my work for me. The company was now a powder keg. All I needed to do was light a single tiny match. I didn't need to commit fraud or use insider information. I was a risk analyst. I knew how to create a ripple that would become a wave. The biotech startup Croft was acquiring was heavily dependent on a specific rare chemical for their researcher chemical whose supply chain ran through a small politically unstable country. This was the kind of detail a thorough risk officer would flag, but a shark like Croft focused only on the prize. Would have overlooked. Through Maria, I found the final piece of intelligence I needed. She sent me a heavily redacted document outlining the timeline for the acquisition. The deal was set to be finalized and publicly announced in 3 weeks. On that day, Croft would be at his most confident, and Sterling Financial, having just committed billions in credit, would be at its most vulnerable. The battlefield was mapped. The vulnerability was identified. The weapon was on the verge of being armed. My heart, steadied by a new sense of purpose, beat a strong, regular rhythm. The dinosaur was about to show the shark what happens when you swim in waters you don't understand. My revenge would not be an explosion. It would be a convergence, a perfect storm of meticulously engineered events. Julian Croft saw the world as a series of bold, decisive actions. I saw it as a web of interconnected probabilities. My strategy was to subtly manipulate those probabilities until they all cascaded in my favor. It was time to put my life's savings and my life's work on the line. The plan was two-pronged. Destabilize the foundation and orchestrate the trigger. First, a small act of house cleaning. I couldn't let HR Director Cynthia, the architect of my humiliating dismissal, get away unscathed. A little digging through public records and archived university websites revealed a delicious discrepancy. The prestigious MBA she listed on her corporate bio and LinkedIn profile wasn't exactly a lie. But it was a carefully curated half-truth. She had attended the program for 1 semester before dropping out. Her actual degree was from a far less impressive online institution. I compiled the evidence enrollment records, course catalogs, a screenshot of her inflated bio into a neat, anonymous package. I didn't send it to Croft. T wouldn't care. I sent it to the executive search firm that had placed her at Sterling. These firms have reputations to protect. Placing a candidate with fraudulent credentials is a cardinal sin. I also sent a copy to a professional compliance and ethics watchdog for the financial industry. Within 2 weeks, Maria informed me that Cynthia had resigned for personal reasons. Quietly and unceremoniously escorted from the building. One secondary threat neutralized with surgical precision. Next, I began setting the dominoes for the main event. Using a discount brokerage account to avoid raising flags, I started making a series of small, seemingly unrelated trades. I took a small short position on the currency of the nation that housed the biotech firm's chemical supply chain. I bought long-dated call options on a rival shipping company that serviced alternate routes. I made a tiny investment in a news aggregator that specialized in geopolitical instability. Each trade was small enough to be invisible, a single drop of rain, but I knew that when the storm hit, they would all flow in the same direction. The obstacle, as I anticipated, was Croft's increasing paranoia. After Cynthia's sudden departure, he tightened internal security. Maria messaged me, her fear palpable. "Frank, they're doing random IT audits. I can't send you any more reports. It's too risky." My primary intelligence stream was cut off. I was flying partially blind, relying on public data and the reports I already had. It was a calculated risk. I had to trust my models, trust my instincts. The tension mounted. I had poured a significant portion of my savings into these positions. If my timing was off, if Croft delayed the announcement, I would be ruined. The final piece of the strategy was the most delicate. I needed to create the narrative that would amplify the market's reaction. Posing as a freelance financial journalist on a popular platform, I started writing. I wrote articles about the hidden risks in biotech supply chains, the dangers of corporate over-leverage, the history of failed synergistic mergers. I never mentioned Sterling or Croft. I was simply an expert voice, seeding the intellectual landscape, preparing the ground. My magnum opus was an in-depth analytical piece I prepared and held in reserve. It was a full-throated critique of the exact type of deal Croft was pursuing, complete with anonymized case studies and predictive models showing a 70% failure rate. It was my kill shot, ready to be fired at the precise moment it would do the most damage the night before the announced acquisition date. I sat before my monitors, the dominoes all in place. My trades were active. My article was queued up, ready to be published. I had done everything I could to manipulate the environment. It was a quiet, intellectual violence. No hacks, no sabotage, just the cold, hard application of risk analysis. My entire life had been about preventing storms. Now, for the first time, I was about to summon one. The morning of the acquisition announcement, my home office felt like a mission control room. The air was thick with tension. On one screen, I had live market tickers. On another, financial news feeds. On a third, a simple custom-built application monitoring the key volatility index my clause was tied to. It's currently sat at 87% of the trigger value. Stable at 9:30 a.m. The official press release hit the wires. Sterling Financial announces landmark acquisition of Biogen Innovations. The market's initial reaction was exactly what Croft wanted. Sterling's stock SDG jumped 8%. The financial news talking heads praised his bold, visionary move. My heart sank. The rising stock price was decreasing volatility. My index monitor dipped to 82%. Croft was winning. My plan was failing. For a moment, a wave of nausea, a phantom echo of my heart attack washed over me. I held my nerve. The market was reacting to the headline, not the substance. It was time to give them the substance. With a steady hand, I hit publish on my article. It went live on a well-respected financial commentary site under the pseudonym Cassandra. The title was provocative: A House of Cards. The unseen debt risk in the biotech merger craze. Simultaneously, I used an anonymous tip service to send the link to a handful of influential, aggressive financial reporters I knew followed these things closely. With a simple message, you might want to look at Sterling Financial's debt load. For the Biogen deal, ask them about their supply chain security. It took 45 minutes. At 10:15 a.m., the first mainstream headline broke. From a major financial news network, analyst raises concerns over Sterling's STG high-leverage Biogen deal. That was the first crack in the dam. My small currency trades, which had been bleeding money, suddenly reversed as a rumor of political instability in the supplier nation. A rumor I may have helped amplify through anonymous forum posts began to circulate. The shipping company options I held ticked upwards. The ripples were converging. The market began to reconsider the deal. The initial euphoria evaporated, replaced by scrutiny. Algorithms designed to detect negative sentiment kicked in, and the sell-off began. First a trickle, then a flood. STG's stock price, which had been up 8%, stalled, reversed, and began to plummet. I watched. My breath held as the stock fell 5%, then 10%, then 15%. The volatility index on my screen began to climb. 90%, 95%, 98%. The moment of truth was a beautiful, terrible sight. As the stock plunged past 20%, triggering a circuit breaker halt. The index on my screen flashed from a calming blue to a screaming red. A single line of text appeared. The culmination of my life's work and my focused rage, Clause 217G. Trigger conditions met. Executing. Deep within Sterling Financial's automated treasury system. A set of instructions dormant for a quarter of a century awakened. It was not a hack. It was a legally embedded, fully authorized protocol operating as designed. The system began to execute a series of complex transactions, liquidating assets from an obscure reserve fund I had established decades ago, a fund Croft didn't even know existed, and transferring them via a series of cascading privacy-protecting intermediaries into a trust account I controlled. The amount was staggering. It wasn't a flat sum. It was the formula. Based on the massive new debt from the acquisition and the market cap loss from the stock crash, the imprudent risk was calculated in the tens of millions. My payout as the primary beneficiary of the protective clause was a significant fraction of that. In the Sterling boardroom, Julian Croft was likely celebrating his big win when his CFO would have burst in, his face the color of ash, holding a printout of an outgoing transaction he couldn't explain and couldn't stop. A massive, 8-figure legacy liability payment that had just drained their liquid reserves at the precise moment they needed them to finalize the acquisition. And at the bottom of the transaction authorization, a digital signature from the systems architect, Frank Miller. The confrontation was not face-to-face. It was far more satisfying. It was his dawning realization, in a room full of the people he was trying to impress, that the dinosaur he had left for dead had just bitten his empire in half. My phone rang, displaying Croft's name. I let it ring for a moment, savoring it. Then I answered, my voice calm and steady. Frank Miller. The sputtering, incoherent rage that poured through the speaker was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. You can't do this, Miller. It's theft. I'll have you in jail for the rest of your miserable life. Croft's voice was a ragged shriek, stripped of all its polished charisma. Julian, I said calmly, picturing him in his glass office, his world crumbling around him. I suggest you have your lawyers look up the Legacy Systems Accord of 1998, specifically Clause 217G. You'll find it's all perfectly legal. It's a contingency I designed to protect the firm from leadership exactly like you. You see, you thought? My job was to manage risk. It was actually to manage you. I heard a strangled gasp, followed by a string of curses. You leveraged the company to the brink, I continued, my voice cold as ice. You bet everything on a single reckless move. The system I built just did what it was designed to do. It called your bet. Consider the payout my retirement bonus. You approved it, after all, when you made my position redundant. Goodbye, Julian. I hung up the phone. The fallout was catastrophic for Croft. The massive, unexpected payout created a black hole in Sterling's balance sheet. They were forced to default on the acquisition's closing payment. The deal collapsed in a blaze of public humiliation. The board, facing shareholder lawsuits and a crisis of confidence, fired Julian Croft immediately. His meteoric rise was matched only by the speed of his fall. He became a cautionary tale in the financial world, the Icarus who flew too close to the sun on wings of debt. My life, in contrast, found a new equilibrium. The money was life-changing, of course, but it was the vindication that truly healed me. I had been discarded as obsolete, but my philosophies, my meticulous work, my dinosaur methods had been proven right in the most spectacular fashion possible. I hadn't just gotten revenge. I had enforced a reckoning. In my own way, I had saved the company from Croft's folly. I came to terms with my own moral complexity. I had manipulated markets, used an ally, and taken a great deal of money. But my actions had a strange, clarifying purity. I had used the rules of the system itself to punish someone who had broken the unwritten rules of human decency. My revenge was not just an act of anger, but an affirmation of my own values. A few weeks later, I received a call from Sterling's new interim CEO, a cautious older board member named Howard Vance. a man I remembered and respected from the Abernathy days. "Frank," he said, his voice weary but warm, "we've been through the records. The auditors have been all over Clause 217G. It's ironclad. I don't know whether to curse you or thank you. Let's just say I left a note for the next generation. Howard." I replied, "I'm sorry it came to that." "Don't be," he said with a dry chuckle. "You cost us a fortune, but Croft would have cost us the company. Enjoy your retirement, Frank. You've earned it." And I did. With my health restored and my future secure, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I used a portion of the money to establish a foundation, the Miller Advocacy, dedicated to providing legal and financial support for older employees pushed out of their jobs after medical crises. My revenge had left me with more than just wealth. It had given me a new purpose. It was a final, satisfying testament to the fact that loyalty, experience, and careful, quiet competence can sometimes be the most powerful weapons of all. The shark was gone, and the dinosaur was finally free to enjoy the sun.